first is by Paul Valéry. Your ideas are terrifying, and your hearts are faint. Your acts of pity and cruelty are absurd, committed with no calm, as if they were irresistible. Finally, you fear blood more and more, blood and time. The second quote that opens this book is by Jakob Böhme. It is not to be thought that the life of darkness is sunk in misery and lost as if in sorrow. There is no sorrow, for sorrow is a thing that is swallowed up in death, and death and dying are the very life of the darkness. The third and final quote to open this book is taken from the Yuma Daily Sun, published on June 13th, 1982. Clark, who led last year's expedition to the Afar region of northern Ethiopia, and UC Berkeley colleague Tim D. White also said that a re-examination of a 300,000-year-old fossil skull found in the same region earlier shows evidence of having been scalped. And now, Blood Meridian.
Chapter 1. Childhood in Tennessee, runs away, New Orleans, fights, is shot, to Galveston, Nacogdoches, the Reverend Green, Judge Holden, and Affray, Toadvine, burning of the hotel, escape. See the child. He's pale and thin. He wears a thin, ragged linen shirt. He stokes the scullery fire. Outside lie dark-turned fields with rags of snow and darker woods beyond that harbor yet a few last wolves. His folk are known for hewers of wood and drawers of water, but in truth his father has been a schoolmaster. He lies in drink. He quotes from poets whose names are now lost. The boy crouches by the fire and watches him. Night of your birth, 33. The Leonids, they were called. God, at the stars did fall. I looked for blackness, holes in the heavens, the dipper stove. The mother, dead these 14 years, did incubate in her own bosom the creature who would carry her off. The father never speaks her name. The child doesn't know it. He has a sister in this world that he will not see again. He watches, pale and unwashed. He can neither read nor write, and in him broods already a taste for mindless violence. All history present in that visage, the child, the father of the man. At 14, he runs away. He will not see again the freezing kitchen house in the pre-dawn dark, the firewood, the washpots. He wanders west as far as Memphis, a solitary migrant upon that flat and pastoral landscape. Blacks in the fields, lank and stooped, their fingers spider-like under the bowls of cotton. A shadowed agony in the garden. Against the sun's declining, figures moving in the slower dusk across a paper sky. A lone, dark husband pursuing mule and harrow down the rain-blown bottomland toward night. A year later, he's in St. Louis. He's taken on for New Orleans aboard a flatboat. 42 days on the river. At night, the steamboats hoot and trudge past through the black waters, all alight like cities adrift. They break up the float and sew the lumber, and he walks in the streets and hears tongues he has not heard before. He lives in a room above a courtyard behind a tavern, and he comes down at night like some fairy book beast to fight with the sailors. He's not big, but he has big wrists, big hands. His shoulders are set close. The child's face is curiously untouched behind the scars, the eyes oddly innocent. They fight with fists, with feet, with bottles or knives. All races, all breeds. Men whose speech sounds like the grunting of apes. Men from lands so far and queer that standing over them where they lie bleeding in the mud, he feels mankind itself vindicated. On a certain night, a Maltese bosun shoots him in the back with a small pistol. Swinging to deal with the man, he is shot again just below the heart. The man flees and leans against the bar with the blood running out of his shirt. The others look away. After a while, he sits on the floor. He lies in a cot in the room upstairs for 2 weeks, while the tavern keeper's wife attends him. She brings his meals. She carries out his slops. A hard-looking woman with a wiry body like a man's. By the time he's mended, he has no money to pay her, and he leaves in the night. He sleeps on the riverbank until he can find a boat that will take him on. The boat is going to Texas. Only now is the child finally divested of all he has been. His origins have become remote, as is his destiny. And not again in all the world's turning will there be terrains so wild and barbarous to try whether the stuff of creation may be shaped to man's will, or whether his own heart is not another kind of clay. The passengers are a diffident lot. They cage their eyes, and no man asks another what it is that brings him here. He sleeps on the deck, a pilgrim among others. He watches the dim shore rise and fall, gray seabirds gawking, flights of elephants on his flies,
Thank you, stranger.
They disembark aboard a liner, settlers with their chattels, all studying the low coastline, the thin, vital sand and scrub pine swimming in the haze. He walks through the narrow streets of the port. The air smells of salt and new sawn lumber. At night, horrors call to him from the dark, like souls in want. A week, and he's on the move again. A few dollars in his purse that he's earned. Walking the sand roads of the southern night alone. His hands bald with cotton pockets in his cheap coat. Earthen causeways across the marshland. Egrets in their rookeries, white as candles among the moss. The wind has a raw edge to it, and leaves lope by the roadside and skelter on in the night fields. He moves north through small settlements and farms, working for day wages and found. He sees a parasite hanged in a crossroads hamlet, and the man's friends run forward and pull his legs, and he hangs dead from his rope while urine darkens his trousers. He works in a sawmill. He works in the diphtheria pest house. He takes as pay from a farmer an aged mule, and to back this animal in the spring of the year 1849, he rides up through the latter-day Republic of Fredonia into the town of Nacogdoches. The Reverend Ben had been playing to a full house daily as long as the rain had been falling. And the rain had been falling for 2 weeks. When the kid ducked into the ratty canvas tent, there was standing room along the walls, a place or two, and such a heady reek of the wet and bathless that they themselves would sally forth into the downpour now and again for fresh air before the rain drove them in again. He stood with others of his kind along the back wall. The only thing that might have distinguished him in that crowd was that he was not armed. "Neighbors," said the Reverend, "he couldn't stay out of these here hell holes right here in Nacogdoches." I said to him, "You gonna take the Son of God in there with you?" And he said, "Oh, no, I ain't." And I said, "Don't you know that he said, I will follow you always, even unto the end of the road?" "Well," he said, "I ain't asking nobody to go nowheres." And I said, "Neighbor, you don't need to ask. He's going to be there with ye every step of the way, whether ye ask it or ye don't." I said, "Neighbor, you can't get shit of him. Now, are you going to drag him, into that hellhole yonder?" "You ever see such a place for rain?" The kid had been watching the Reverend. He turned to the man who spoke. He wore long mustaches after the fashion of Teamsters, and he wore a wide-brimmed hat with a low, round crown. He was slightly warlike, and he was watching the kid earnestly, as if he'd know his opinion about the ring. "I just got here," said the kid. "Well, it beats all I ever seen." The kid nodded. An enormous man, dressed in an oilcloth slicker, had entered the tent and removed his hat. He was bald as a stone, and he had no trace of beard, and he had no brows to his eyes, nor lashes to them. He was close on to 7 feet in height, and he stood smoking a cigar even in this nomadic house of God. And he seemed to have removed his hat only to chase the rain from it, for now he put it on again. The Reverend had stopped his sermon altogether.
Yep.
There was no sound from the tent. All watched the man. He adjusted the hat and then pushed his way forward as far as the crate-board pulpit where the Reverend stood, and there he turned to address the Reverend's congregation. His face was serene and strangely childlike. His hands were small. He held them out. "Ladies and gentlemen, I feel it my duty to inform you that the man holding this revival is an imposter. He holds no papers of divinity from any institution recognized or improvised.
What the hell?
He is altogether devoid of the least qualification to the office he has usurped, and has only committed to memory a few passages from the good book for the purpose of lending to his fraudulent sermons some faint flavor of the piety he despises. In truth, the gentleman standing here before you, posing as a minister of the Lord, is not only totally illiterate, but is also wanted by the law in the states of Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Arkansas." "Oh, God!" cried the Reverend. "Lies, lies!" He began reading feverishly from his open Bible. "On a variety of charges, the most recent of which involved a girl of 11 years. I said 11, who had come to him in trust and whom he was surprised in the act of violating while actually clothed in the livery of his God." A moan swept through the crowd. A lady sank to her knees. "This is him!" cried the Reverend, sobbing. "This is him, the devil! Here he stands!" "Let's hang the turd!" called an ugly thug from the gallery to the rear. Not 3 weeks before this, he was run out of Fort Smith, Arkansas, for having congress with a goat. Yes, lady, that is what I said. Goat. "Why, damn my eyes if I won't shoot the son of a bitch," said a man rising at the far side of the tent, and drawing a pistol from his boot, he leveled it and fired. The young teamster instantly produced a knife from his clothing and unseamed the tent and stepped outside into the rain. The kid followed. They ducked low and ran across the mud toward the hotel. Already, gunfire was general within the tent, and a dozen exits had been hacked through the canvas walls, and people were pouring out, women screaming, folk stumbling, folk trampled underfoot in the mud. The kid and his friend reached the hotel gallery and wiped the water from their eyes and turned to watch. As they did so, the tent began to sway and buckle, and like a huge and winding Medusa, it slowly settled to the ground, trailing tattered canvas walls and ratty guide ropes over the ground. The bald-headed man was already at the bar when they entered. On the polished wood before him were 2 hats and a double handful of coins. He raised his glass, but not to them. They stood up to the bar and ordered whiskeys, and the kid laid his money down, but the barman pushed it back with his thumb and nodded. "These here's on the judge," he said. They drank. The teamster set his glass down and looked at the kid, or he seemed to. You couldn't be sure of his gaze. The kid looked down the bar to where the judge stood. The bar was that tall, not every man could even get his elbows up on it. But it came just to the judge's waist, and he stood with his hands placed flatwise on the wood, leaning slightly, as if about to give another address. By now, men were piling through the doorway, bleeding, covered in mud, cursing. They gathered about the judge. A posse was being drawn to pursue the preacher. Judge, how'd you come to have the goods on that no account? Goods? Said the judge. When was you in Fort Smith? Fort Smith?
Hey there!
Where did you know him to know all that stuff on him?
That's a nice horse.
You mean the Reverend Green? Yes, sir. I reckon you was in Fort Smith before you come out here. I was never in Fort Smith in my life. Doubt that he was. They looked from one to the other. Well, where was it you run up on him? I never laid eyes on the man before today. Never even heard of him. He raised his glass. There was a strange silence in the room. The men looked like mud effigies.
Okay, that's enough.
Soon they were all laughing together. Someone brought the judge.
Come on, boy. Come on.
It had been raining for 16 days when he met Toadvine, and it was raining yet. He was still standing in the same saloon, and he had drunk up all his money save $2. The teamster had gone. The room was all but empty. The doors stood open, and you could see the rain falling in the empty lot behind the hotel. He drained his glass and went out. There were boards laid across the mud, and he followed the pale and banging doorlight down toward the backboard jakes at the bottom of the lot. Another man was coming up from the jakes, and they met halfway on the narrow planks. The man before him swayed slightly. His wet hat brim fell to his shoulders, saving the front that was pinned back. He held a bottle loosely in one hand. You better get out of my way, he said. The kid wasn't going to do that, and he saw no use in discussing it. He kicked the man in the jaw. The man went down, got up again. He said, I'm gonna kill you. He swung with the bottle, and the kid ducked. And he swung again, and the kid stepped back. When the kid hit him, the man shattered the bottle against the side of his head. He went off the boards into the mud, and the man lunged after him, getting a jagged bottleneck and tried to stick it in his eye. The kid was fending with his hands, and they were slick with blood. He kept trying to reach into his boot for his knife. Kill your ass, the man said. They slogged about in the dark of the lot, coming out of their boots. The kid had his knife now. They circled crabwise, and when the man lurched at him, he cut the man's shirt open. The man threw down the bottleneck and unsheathed an immense bowie knife from behind his neck.
Howdy.
His hat had come off, and his black and ropey locks swung about his head, and he had codified his threats to the one word kill, like a crazed chant. Dad's cut, said one of several men standing along the walkway watching. Kill, kill, slobbered the man waiting for him. But someone else was coming down the lot. Great, steady, sucking sounds like a cow. He was carrying a huge shell.
Big mouths, don't you?
He reached the kid first, and when he swung with the club, the kid went face down in the mud. He'd have died if someone hadn't turned him over. When he woke, it was daylight, and the rain had stopped. And he was looking up into the face of a man with long hair who was completely covered in mud. The man was saying something to him.
Gentlemen.
What? Said the kid. I said, are you quits? Quits? Quits. Because if you want some more of me, you sure as I'm gonna get it.
Hey there, partner.
He looked at the sky. Very high, very small, buzzing. He looked at the man. Is my neck broke? He said. The man looked out over the lot and spat and looked at the boy again. Can you not get up? I don't know. I ain't trying. I never meant to break your neck. No, meant to kill you. Ain't nobody done it yet. He clawed at the mud and pushed himself up. The man was sitting on the planks with his boots alongside him. There ain't nothing wrong with you, he said. The kid looked about stiffer
Hey,
every
Shaw, how
day.
you doing?
Where's my boots? He said. The man squinted at him. Flakes of dried mud fell from his face. I'm gonna have to kill some son of a bitch to dig up my boots. Yonder looks like one of them. The kid labored off through the mud and fetched up one boot. He slogged about in the yard, feeling lightly lumps of mud. It's your knife? He said. The man squinted at him. Looks like it, he said. The kid pitched it to him, and he bent and picked it up and wiped the huge blade on his trouser. Thought somebody done stole you, he told the knife. The kid found his other boot and came and sat on the boards. His hands were huge with mud, and he wiped one of them briefly at his knee and let it fall again. They sat there side by side, looking out across the barren lot. There was a picket fence at the edge of the lot, and beyond the fence, a boy was drawing water at a well, and there were chickens in the yard there. A man came from the dram shop door down the walk toward the outhouse. He stopped where they sat and looked at them, and then stepped off into the mud. After a while, he came back and stepped off into the mud again, and went around on up the wall.
Such a long time. Time for a new gun, perhaps?
The kid looked at the
Let me
man.
know if I can help you choosing something.
His head was strangely narrow, and his hair was plastered up with mud in a bizarre and primitive coiffure. On his forehead were burned the letters HT, and lower and almost between the eyes the letter F. And these markings were splayed and garish, as if the iron had been left too long. When he turned to look at the kid could see that he had no ears.
I think that's the right
He stood up and sheathed the knife and started up the walk with the boots in his
do
hand.
a range of
And the
excellent
kid
sex
rose
guns.
and followed.
They can really make the difference.
Halfway to the hotel, the man stopped and looked out at the mud
I
and
could
then
pick some
sat
different
down
spots
on
for
the
you.
planks and
Could make
pulled
it
on
more
the boots,
comfortable on
mud
the
and all.
shoulder.
Then he rose and slogged off through the lot to pick something up. I want you to look here, he said, at my goddamn hat.
I can do some nice
You couldn't tell
ornate
what it
engraving
was.
on there.
Something
If you
dead.
like, good price.
He flapped it about and pulled it over his head and went on, and the kid followed. The dram house was a long, narrow hall, wainscoted with varnished boards. There were tables by the wall and spittoons on the floor. There were no patrons. The barman looked up when they entered, and a nigger that had been sweeping the floor stood the broom against the wall and went out.
Man got shot right there
Where's
on
Sidney?
Courtney Street.
Said the man
Down
in
here,
his
you
suit of
carry
mud.
a gun.
In the bed, I reckon. They went on. Toadvine, called the barman. The kid looked back. The barman had come from behind the bar and was looking after them. They crossed from the door through the lobby of the hotel toward the stairs, leaving varied forms of mud behind them on the floor. As they started up the stairs, the clerk at the desk
When you're
leaned
heading
and called to
anywhere near
them.
the slums,
Toadvine!
take a lot of bullets with you.
He stopped and looked back. He'll shoot you. Old Sidney. Old Sidney. They went on up the stairs. At the top of the landing was a long hall with a window light at the end. There were varnished doors down the walls, set so close they
Have
might
you
have been
owned a pistol
closets.
before?
Toadvine went on until he came to the end of the hall. He listened at the last door, and he
You
eyed the
made
kid.
a good decision.
You got a match?
Would you be
The kid
interested in
searched
me
his
changing
pockets
some of the
and
parts
came
at
up with a
all?
crushed and stained wooden box. The man took it from him. I need a little tinder here,
Fire
he said.
on.
He was crumbling the box and
Rifle
stacking
barrel
the bits
adds
against the door.
noticeable accuracy.
He struck
We
a
can do
match
that
and
to
set
this
the
model
pieces
for a
alight.
great price.
He pushed the little
Nice
pile
enough.
of
I like
burning
it.
wood under the door and added more matches. Is he in there? Said the boy. That's what we're fixing to see. A dark curl of smoke rose, a blue flame of burning varnish. They squatted in the hallway and watched. Thin flames began to run up over the panels and dart back again. The watchers looked like forms excavated from a bog. "Tap on the door now," said Toadvine. The kid rose. Toadvine stood up and waited.
Finest quality guns.
They could hear the flames crackling inside the room. The kid tapped. "You better tap louder than that. This man drinks some." He balled his fist and lambasted the door about 5 times. "Don't fire," said a voice. "Here he comes." They waited. "You hot son of a bitch," said the voice. Then the knob turned and the door opened. He stood in his underwear, holding in one hand the towel he'd used to turn the doorknob with. When he saw them, he turned and started back into the room. But Toadvine seized him about the neck and rode him to the floor and held him by the hair and began to pry out an eyeball with his thumb. The man grabbed his wrist and bit it. "Kick his mouth in,"
Thanks,
called
mister.
Toadvine. "Kick it." The kid stepped past them into the room and turned and kicked the man in the face. Toadvine held his head back by the hair. "Kick him," he called. "Oh, kick him, honey." He kicked. Toadvine pulled the bloody head around and looked at it and let it flop to the floor. And he rose and kicked the man himself. 2 spectators were standing in the hallway. The door was completely afire, and part of the wall had ceiling. They went out and down the hall. The clerk was coming up the steps 2 at a time. "Toadvine, you son of a bitch," he said. Toadvine was 4 steps above him, and when he kicked him, he caught him in the throat. The clerk sat down on the stairs. When the kid came past, he hit him in the side of the head, and the clerk slumped over and began to slide toward the landing. The kid stepped over him and went down to the lobby and crossed the front door and out.
Say hi,
Toadvine was running down the street, waving his fists above his head crazily and laughing. He looked like a great clay voodoo doll made animate, and the kid looked like another. Behind them, flames were licking at the top corner of the hotel, and clouds of dark smoke rose into the warm Texas morning. He left the mule with a Mexican family and boarded animals at the edge of town, and he arrived there wild-looking and out of breath. The woman opened the door and looked at him. "Need to get my mule," he wheezed. She looked at him some more, and she called toward the back of the house. He walked around. There were horses tethered in the lot, and there was a flatbed wagon against the fence with some turkeys sitting on the edge looking out. The old lady had come to the back door.
Hello.
"Nito," she called.
Venga, hay un caballero aquí. Venga.
He went down the shed to the tackle room and got his wretched saddle and his blanket roll and brought them back. He found the mule and unstalled it and bridled it with a rawhide hackamore and led it to the fence. He leaned against the animal with his shoulder and got the saddle over it and got it cinched, the mule starting and shying and running its head along the fence. He led it across the lot. The mule kept shaking its head sideways, as if it had something in its ear. He led it out to the road. As he passed the house, the woman came padding out after him. When she saw him put his foot in the stirrup, she began to run.
Hey, folks.
He swung up into the broken saddle and chucked the mule forward.
Apologies.
She stopped at the gate and watched him go. He didn't look back. When he passed back through the town, the hotel was burning, and men were standing around watching it, some holding empty buckets. A few men sat horseback watching the flames, and one of these was the judge. As the kid rode past, the judge turned and watched him. He turned the horse, as if he'd have the animal watch too. When the kid looked back, the judge smiled. The kid touched up the mule, and they went sucking out past the old stone fort along the road west.
People around here come in just for those.
Chapter 2. Across the prairie, a hermit, a nigger's heart, a stormy night. Westward again, cattle drovers, their kindness. On the trail again, the dead cart, San Antonio de Bear, a Mexican cantina, another fight, the abandoned church, the dead in the sacristy, at the ford.
Let me know what I can do to help you leave here feeling good and looking great.
Now come days of begging, days of theft, days of riding where there rode no soul save he. He's left behind the pinewood country, and the evening sun declines before him beyond an endless swell.
A local favorite.
And dark falls here like a thunderclap, and a cold wind sets the weeds to gnashing.
Okay.
The night sky lies so sprent with stars that there is scarcely a space of black at all, and they fall all night in bitter arcs.
All
And
right,
it is so that their numbers are no less.
Alright, let's go hunting.
He keeps from off the King's Road for fear of citizenry. The little prairie wolves cry all night, and dawn finds him in a grassy draw where he'd gone to hide from the wind. The hobbled mule stands over him and watches the east for light.
Bonjour.
The sun that rises is the color of steel.
Y'all doing all right?
His mounted shadow falls for
I'm
miles
in a
before him.
terrible state, to be sure.
He wears on his head a hat he's made from leaves. They have dried and cracked in the sun. And he looks like a raggedy man wandered from some garden where he used to frighten birds.
Hey there. Hey, what the hell is wrong with you?
Come evening, he tracks a spire of smoke rising oblique from among the low hills. And before dark, he hails up at the doorway of an old anchorite, nested away in the sod like a ground sloth.
Nope.
Solitary, half mad, his eyes red-rimmed as if locked in their cages with hot wires.
Sorry, baby.
But a ponderable body before that. He watched wordless while the kid eased down stiffly from the
Hey,
deal.
don't bite.
A rough wind was blowing, and his rags flapped about him. "Seen ye smoke," said the kid. "Thought you might spare a man a sup of water."
Come on, kitty.
The old hermit scratched in his filthy
Come on,
hair and
kitty.
looked at the ground.
That's a good
He turned and entered the hut, and the kid followed.
That's a good boy.
Inside, darkness and a smell of earth. A small fire burned on the dirt floor, and the only furnishings were a pile of hides in one corner. The old man shuffled through the gloom, his head bent to clear the low ceiling of woven limbs and mud. He pointed down to where a bucket stood in the dirt. The kid bent and took up the gourd floating there and dipped and drank. The water was salty, sulphurous.
Get some
He drank on.
squirrel first.
"You reckon I can water my old mule out there?" The old man began to beat his palm with one fist and dart his eyes about.
Fellas from the riverboat, ain't you?
"Be proud to fetch in some fresh.
For what?
Just tell me where it's at.
$dollars?
Where you aim to water him
Cheap
with."
to you, is it?
The kid looked at the
Run
bucket
your mouth
and
at
looked
me.
around.
Get out of my side or you'll get the same as
"I
them.
ain't drinking after no mule," said the hermit.
I promise.
"Have you not got no old bucket in it?"
Bro, you completely insane?
"No," cried the hermit. "No, I ain't." He was clapping the heels of his clenched fists together in his chest. The kid rose and looked toward the door.
Uh-oh.
"I'll find something." "Where's the well?" "Up the hill. Follow the path. It's not too dark to see.
Yeah,
Deep there. Follow your feet. Follow your mule. I can't go." He stepped out into the wind and looked about for the mule, but the mule wasn't there. Far to the south, lightning flared soundlessly. He went up the path among the thrashing weeds and found the mule standing at the well. A hole in the sand with rocks piled about it. A piece of dry hide for a cover and a stone to weight it down.
Okay, stolen.
There was a rawhide bucket with a rawhide bale and a rope of greasy leather. The bucket had a rock tied to the bale to help it tip and fill, and he lowered it until the rope in his hand went slack while the mule watched over his shoulder.
Sedated him earlier.
He drew up 3 bucketfuls and held them so the mule wouldn't spill them. And then he put the cover back over the well and led the mule back down the path to the hut. "Now thank ye for the water," he called. The hermit appeared darkly in the door. "Just stay with me,"
Okay, Kitty.
he said. "That's all right. Best stay. It's fixing to storm." "You reckon?" "I reckon, and I reckon right." "Well, bring your bed. Bring your possibles." He uncinched and threw down the saddle and hobbled the mule foreleg to rear and took his bedroll with him. There was no light save the fire, and the old man was squatting by it tailor-wise. Anywheres," he said. "Where's your saddle at?" The kid gestured with his chin. "Don't leave it out yonder. Some will eat it. This is a hungry country." He went out and ran into the mule in the dark. It had been standing looking in at the fire. "Get away, fool,"
Where's that
he said.
first?
He took up the saddle and went back in. "Now pull that door to before we blow away," said the old man. The door was a mass of planks on leather hinges. He dragged it across the dirt and fastened it by its leather latch. "I take it you lost your way," said the hermit. "No, I went right to it." He waved quickly with his hand at the old man. No, he said. "I mean, you was lost to come here. Was there a sandstorm? Did you drift off the road in the night? Did thieves beset you?" The kid pondered this. "Yes," he said. "We got off the road some ways or another." "No, you did."
Hey there, mister.
"How long have you been out here?"
How there, mister?
Where?
Don't you know how to control that thing?
The kid was sitting on his blanket roll across the fire of the old man. "Here," he said, "in this place." The old man didn't answer. He turned his head suddenly aside and seized his nose between his thumb and forefinger and blew twin strings of snot onto the floor and wiped his fingers on the seam of his jeans. "I come from Mississippi. I was a slaver. Don't care to tell you. Made good money. I never did get caught. Just got sick of niggers. Wait till I show you something." He turned and rummaged among the hides and handed through the flames a small, dark thing. The kid turned it in his hand. Some man's heart, dried and blackened.
Hey.
He passed it back, and the old man cradled it in his palm as if he'd weigh it. "There's 4 things that can destroy the earth," he said. "Women, whiskey, money, and niggers." They sat in silence. The wind moaned in the section of stovepipe that was run through the roof above them to quit the place of smoke. After a while, the old man put the heart away. "That thing cost me $200, he said. "You give $200 for it?" "I did. But that was the price they put on the black son of a bitch it hung inside of. He stirred about in the corner and came up with an old dark brass kettle, lifted the cover and poked inside with one finger. The remains of one of the lank prairie hares interred in cold grease and furred with a light blue mold. He clamped the lid back on the kettle and set it in the flames. "Ain't much, but we'll go shares," he said. "I thank you." "Lost your way in the dark," said the old man. He stirred the fire, standing slender tusks of bone up out of the ashes. The kid didn't answer. The old man swung his head back and forth. "The way of the transgressor is hard. God made this world, but he didn't make it to suit everybody, did he? And I don't believe he much had me in mind."
Hey, mister.
"Aye," said the old man. But where does a man come by his notions?
Manners cost nothing.
What worlds he seen that he liked better? I can think of better places and better ways. Can you make it be? No. No. It's a mystery. A man's at odds to know his mind, because his mind is aught he has to know it with. He can know his heart, but he don't want to. Rightly so. Best not to look in there. It ain't the heart of a creature that is bound in the way that God has set for it. You can find meanness in the least of creatures. But when God made man, the devil was at his elbow. A creature that can do anything. Make a machine. And a machine to make the machine. An evil that can run itself 1,000 years. No need to tend it. You believe that? I don't know. Believe that. When the old man's mess was warmed, he doled it out and they ate in silence. Thunder was moving north, and before long it was booming overhead, and starting to hit some rust and a thin trickle down the stovepipe. They hunkered over their plates and wiped the grease up with their fingers and drank from the gourd. The kid went out and scoured his cup and plate in the sand, and came back banging the tins together as if to fend away some dry gulch phantom out there in the dark. Distant thunderheads reared quivering against the electric sky and were sucked away in the blackness.
Wait, shit.
The old man sat with one ear cocked to the howling waste without. The kid shook. Just go on, fix your bed, he said. He did, spreading his blankets on the packed mud and pulling off his stinking boots. The flue pipe moaned, and he heard the mules sticking like sound outside, and in his sleep he struggled with muttered like a dreaming dog. He woke sometime in the night with a flutter almost total
There we go.
But the hermit crawled away, and in the morning when he woke, the hut was empty, and he got his things and left. All that day he watched.
No!
Before he could see that it was headed his way.
It's too
He
late.
passed through a forest of live oak, and he watered at a stream. In the dawn, the dusk, the fires came. Birds woke him where he lay in a dry and dusty wood. By noon he was on the prairie again, and the dust of the north was stretched out along the edge of the earth. By evening, the first of a drove of cattle came to the earth. Rangy, vicious beasts with enormous horn spreads. That night he sat on a herder's camp and ate beans and pilot and heard of life in jail. They were coming down from Abilene, 40 days out, headed for the markets in Louisiana.
Hey, stop! You can't be here! No more short!
They asked them I had my outfit stolen. They nodded in the firelight. They got everything I had.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to
I ain't even got a knife. You might could sign on with us.
Come on.
We lost two men. Turned back to go to California.
Join in the Lemoyne Raiders.
I'm headed down. I guess you might be going to California young, so. I might. I ain't decided. Them boys was with us. Fell in with a bunch from Arkansas. They was headed down for Bear. Gonna move from Mexico to the west. I bet them old boys is in Bear drinking their brains out.
Trouble up front!
I bet old Lonnie's done talked to me before.
That's
How far is it? It's about 2 days.
wait, I think
It's
this
further
right
back, more like 4, I'd say. How would a man go if he had a mind to? You cut straight south, you ought to hit the road about half a day.
You going to Bear?
I do. You see old Lonnie down there, you tell him to get a piece from me. Tell him to hold on. He'll buy you a drink if he ain't blowed over. In the morning, they ate flapjacks with molasses. The herders saddled up and moved on. When he found his mule, there was a small fiber bag tied to the animal's rope. And inside the bag, there was a cup full of dried beans and some peppers and an old Green River knife with a handle made of string.
Nope.
He saddled up the mule.
Nope.
The mule's back
Nope.
galled and balding. The hooves cracked.
Nope.
The ribs like fish bones.
Nope.
They hobbled
Nope.
on across the endless plain.
Oh boy.
He came upon Bear in the evening of the fourth
Oh
day,
boy.
and he sat the
Oh,
tattered
I
mule
know.
on a low rise and looked down at the town. The quiet adobe houses, the line of green oaks and cottonwoods that marked the course of the river.
The plaza filled with wagons with their Osnaburg covers.
And the whitewashed public buildings, and the Moorish church dome rising from the trees, and the garrison, the tall stone powerhouse in the distance. A white man staring at the phones of his head, his matted greasy hair. His eyes lay wide, his mouth haunted face. The foul stench rose from the grass of his boots. The sun was just setting, and the west lay weeds of blood-red clouds. Up out of which rose little desolate mountains like fugitives from some great fire. He spat a dry, white spit and clumped the cracked wooden stirrups against the mule's ribs, and they staggered into motion again. He went down a narrow, sandy road, and as he went, he met a dead cart bound out with a load of corpses. A small bell tolled the way, and a lamp swinging from the gate. 3 men sat on the cart, unlike the dead themselves, were spirit folk, so white they were in the line, nearly phosphorescent in the dusk. A pair of horses came out. They went on up the road, made my answer. As he turned to watch the road. The naked field of dead jostled sleeping. It was dark in the middle of the town, attended by barking dogs, faces parting the curtains in the lamp-lit windows. The light cloud of the mule's hooves echoing in the little empty streets. The mule sniffed the air and swung down an alleyway into a square where there stood in the starlight a well, a trough, like a chip rail. The kid eased himself down and took the bucket from a stone coping and lowered it into the well. The light splashed out. He drew the bucket, water dripping in the dark. He tipped the gourd and drank, and the mule muzzled his elbow. When he found, he set the bucket in the street and sat on the coping of the well and watched the mule drink from the bucket. He went on through the town. There was no one about. By and by, he came to the plaza. He gave guitars and the far end of the square, there were lights from a cafe, and laughter, and high-pitched cries. He led the mule into the square and up the far side past a long portico toward the lights. There was a team of dancers in the street, and they wore gaudy costumes and called out in Spanish. He and the mule stood at the edge of the lights and watched. Old men sat along the tavern wall, and children played in the dust. They wore strange costumes, all. The men in dark, flat-crowned hats, white nightshirts, trousers that buttoned up the outside leg. And the girls with garish painted faces and tortoiseshell combs in their blue-black hair. The kid crossed the street with the mule and tied it and entered the cafe. A number of men were standing at the bar, and they quit talking when he entered. He crossed the polished clay floor past a sleeping dog that opened one eye and looked at him. And he stood at the bar and placed both hands on the tiles. The barman nodded to him. "Dígame." he said. I ain't got no money, but I need a drink. I'll fetch out the slops and mop the floor or whatever. The barman looked across the room to where two men were playing dominoes at a table. Abuelito, he said. The older of the two raised his head. Que dice el muchacho? The old man looked at the kid and turned back to his dominoes. The barman shrugged his shoulders. The kid turned to the old man. You speak American? He said. The old man looked up from his play. He regarded the kid without expression. Tell him I'll work for a drink. I ain't got no money. The old man thrust his chin and made a clucking noise with his tongue. The kid looked at the barman. The old man made a fist with the thumb pointing up and the little finger down, and tilted his head back and tipped a phantom drink down his throat.
Howdy.
Quiere echarse una copa, he said. Pero no puede pagar. The men at the bar watched. The barman looked at the kid. Quiere trabajo, said the old man. Quien sabe? He turned back to his pieces and made his play without further consultation. Quieres trabajar, said one of the men at the bar. They began to laugh. What are you laughing at? Said the boy. They stopped. Some looked at him, some pursed their mouths or shrugged. The boy turned to the bartender. You got something I could do for a couple of drinks. I know damn good and well. One of the men at the bar said something in Spanish. The boy glared at them. They winked one to the other. They took up their glasses.
Look out!
He turned to the barman again. His eyes were dark and narrow. Sweep the floor, he said. The barman blinked. The kid stepped back and made sweeping motions, a pantomime that bent the drinkers in silent mirth. Sweep, he said, pointing at the floor. No está sucio, said the barman. He swept again. Sweep, goddammit, he said. The barman shrugged. He went to the end of the bar and got a broom and brought it back. The boy took it and went on to the back of the room. A great hall of a place. He swept in the corners where potted trees stood silent in the dark. He swept around the spittoons, and he swept around the players at the table, and he swept around the dog. He swept along the front of the bar, and when he reached the place where the drinkers stood, he straightened up and leaned on the broom and looked at them. They conferred silently among themselves, and at last one took his glass from the bar and stepped away. The others followed. The kid stepped past them to the door. The dancers had gone, the music. Across the street sat a man on a bed dimly lit in the doorlight from the cafe. The mule stood where he had tied it. He tapped the broom on the steps and came back in and took the broom to the corner where the barman had gotten it. Then he came to the bar and stood. The barman ignored him. The kid rapped with his knuckles. The barman turned and put one hand on his hip and pursed his lips. How about that drink now? Said the kid. The barman stood. The kid made the drinking motions that the old man had made, and the barman flapped his towel idly at him. Andale, he said. He made a shooing motion with the back of his hand. The kid's face clouded. You son of a bitch, he said. He started down the bar. The barman's expression didn't change. He brought up from under the bar an old-fashioned military pistol with a flintlock and shoved back the cock with the heel of his hand. A great wooden clicking in the silence. The clicking of glasses all down the bar. Then the scuffling of chairs pushed back by the players.
You goddamn moron!
The kid froze. Old man, he said. The old man didn't answer. There was no sound in the cafe. The kid turned to find him with his eyes. Está borracho, said the old man. The boy watched the barman's eyes. The barman waved the pistol toward the door. The old man spoke to the room in Spanish. Then he spoke to the barman. Then he put on his hat and went out. The barman's face drained. When he came around the end of the bar, he had laid down the pistol. He was carrying a bung slug in one hand. The kid backed in the center of the room, and the barman labored over the floor toward him like a man on his way to some shore. He swung twice at the kid, and the kid stepped twice to the right. Then he stepped back. The barman froze. The kid boosted himself lightly over the bar and picked up the pistol. No one moved. He raked the frizzen open against the bar top and dumped a primary and laid the pistol down again. Then he selected a pair of full bottles from the shelves behind him and came around the end of the bar with one in each hand. The barman stood in the center of the room. He was breathing heavily, and he turned, following the kid's movements. When the kid approached him, he raised the bung starter. The kid crouched lightly with the bottles and fainted, and then broke the right one over the man's head. Blood and liquor sprayed, and the man's knees buckled and his eyes rolled. The kid had already let go of the bottleneck, and he pitched the second bottle into his right hand in a road agent's pass before it even reached the floor. And he backhanded the second bottle across the barman's skull and crammed the jagged remnant into his eye as he went down. The kid looked around the room. Some of those men wore pistols in their belts, but none moved.
Hey there!
The kid vaulted the bar and took another bottle and tucked it under his arm and walked out the door. The dog was gone. The man on the bench was gone, too. He untied the mule and led it across the square.
Yeah, I don't think you can get it. No,
He
you
woke
gotta
in
try
the
it.
nave of a ruinous church, blinking up at the vaulted ceiling and the tall, swagged walls with their faded frescoes. The floor of the church was deep in dried wine and the droppings of cattle and sheep.
No,
Pigeons
that's not
flapped
what
through
it
the
is.
tiers of dusty
Yeah.
light,
Get in there.
and 3 buzzards hobbled about and picked bone carcass of some animal dead in the chancel. His head was in torment, and his tongue swollen with thirst. He sat up and looked around him. He put the bottle under his saddle. He found it and held it up and shook it and drew the cork and drank. He sat with his eyes closed, the sweat beaded on his forehead. Then he opened his eyes and drank again. The buzzards stepped down one by one and trotted off into the sacristy. After a while, he rose and went out to look for a mule. There was nowhere in sight. The mission occupied 8 or 10 years of enclosed land, a barren purlieu that held a few goats and burros. In the mud walls of the enclosure were cribs inhabited by families of spotters, and a few cook fires smoked thinly in the sun. He walked around the side of the church and entered the sacristy. Buzzards shuffled off through the chaff and plaster like enormous yard fowl. The domed vaults overhead were clotted with a dark, furred mass that shifted and breathed and chittered. In the room was a wooden table with a few clay pots, and along the back wall lay the remains of several bodies, one a child. He went on through the sacristy into the church again and got his saddle. He drank the rest of the bottle, and he put the saddle on his shoulder and went out. The facade of the building bore arrays in their niches, and they had been shot up by American troops trying their rifles. The figures shorn of ears and noses and darkly mottled with lead marks oxidized upon the stone. The huge carved and paneled doors hung a wap on their hinges, and a carved stone virgin held in her arms a headless child. He stood blinking in the noon heat. Then he saw the mule's tracks. They were just the palest disturbance of the dust, and they came out of the door of the church and crossed the lot to the gate in the east wall. He hiked the saddle higher onto his shoulder and set out after them. A dog in the shade of the portal rose and lurched sullenly out into the sun until he had passed, and then lurched back. He took the road down the hill toward the river. a ragged figure enough. He entered a deep wood of pecan and oak, and the road took a rise, and he could see the river below him. Blacks were washing a carriage in the ford, and he went down the hill and stood at the edge of the water, and after a while he called out to them. They were sopping water over the black lacquer work, and one of them raised up and turned to look at him. The horses stood to their knees in the current. "What?" called the black. "Have you seen a mule?" "Mule? I lost a mule. I think he come this way."
Nope.
The black wiped his face with the back of his arm. "Something come down the road about an hour back. I think it went down the river yonder. Might have been a mule. It didn't have no tail, nor no hair to speak of, but it did have long ears." The other two blacks grinned. The kid looked off down the river. He spat and set off along the path through the willows and swales of grass. He found it about 100 yards downriver. It was wet to its belly, and it looked up at him and then lowered its head again into the lush river grass. He threw down the saddle and took up the trailing rope and tied the animal to a limb and kicked it half-heartedly. It shifted slightly to the side and continued to graze. He reached atop his head, but he had lost the crazy hat somewhere. He made his way down through the trees and stood looking at the cold, swollen waters. Then he waded out into the river like some holy, wretched baptismal candidate.
He's not happy about it. Come on. Chapter 4?
Chapter 3.
No.
Sought out to join an army. Interview with Captain White. His views. The camp. Trades his mule. A cantina in the Laredito. A Mennonite. Companion killed. He was lying naked under the trees with his rags spread across the limbs above him when another rider going down the river reined up and stopped. He turned his head. Through the willows he could see the legs of the horse. He rolled over on his stomach. The man got down and stood beside the horse. He reached and got his twine-handled knife. "Howdy there," said the rider. He didn't answer. He moved to the side to see better through the branches. "Howdy there. Where you at?" "What do you want?" "Wanted to talk to you." "What about?" "Hellfire, come on out. I'm white and Christian."
No.
The kid was reaching up through the willows trying to get his breeches. The belt was hanging down, and he tugged at it, but the breeches were hung on a limb. "Goddamn," said the man. "You ain't up in the tree, are you? Why don't you go on and leave me the hell alone? Just wanted to talk to you. Didn't intend to get you all riled up." "You done got me riled." "Was you the fella knocked in that Mexer's head yesterday evening? I ain't the law." "Who wants to know?" "Captain White. He wants to sign that fella up to join the army."
The army?
"Yes, sir.
What army?
Company under Captain White. We're going to whip up on the Mexicans."
The war's over.
"He says it ain't over." "Where are you at?" He rose and hauled the breeches down from where he'd hung them and pulled them on. He pulled on his boots and put the knife in the right boot leg and came out from the willows pulling on his shirt. The man was sitting in the grass with his legs crossed. He was dressed in buckskin, and he wore a plug hat of dusty black silk, and he had a small Mexican cigar in the corner of his teeth. When he saw what clawed its way out through the willows, he shook his head. "Kinda fell on hard times, ain't you, son?" he said.
I just ain't fell on no good ones.
"You ready to go to Mexico?"
I ain't lost nothing down there.
"It's a chance for you to raise yourself in the world. You best make a move somewhere before you go plumb in under. What do they give you? Every man gets a horse and his ammunition. I reckon we might find some clothes in your case. I ain't got no rifle. We'll find you one. What about wages? Hell, fire, son, you won't need no wages. You get to keep everything you can raise. We're going to Mexico. Spoils war. And a man with nobody won't come out of it. How much land do you want? That's it. The man eyed. He took the unlit cigar from his teeth and turned his head and spat and put it back again. Where are you from? He said. Tennessee. Tennessee? Well, I don't miss out what you can shoot rifle. It's strong. You're the man's horse. The horse was fitted out with tool leather, worked silver trim. It had a white blaze on its face and 4 white stockings, and it was cropping up great teethfuls of the rich grass. Where are you from? Said the kid. I've been in Texas since '38. If I had not run up on Captain White, I don't know where I'd be this day. I was a sorrier sight even than what you are. And he come along and raised me up like Lazarus. Set my feet in the path of righteousness. I done took to drinking and horror until hell wouldn't have it. He'd seen something in me worth saving, and I see it in you. What do you say? I don't know. Just come with me and meet the captain. The boy pulled the harness of grass. He looked at the horse again. Well, he said, don't reckon it'd hurt nothing. They rode through the town with the recruiter splendid on the stocking-footed horse, and the kid behind him on the mule like something he'd captured. They rode through narrow lanes where the wattled huts steamed in the heat. Grass and prickly pear grew on the roofs, and goats walked about on them. And somewhere off in that squalid kingdom of mud, the sound of the little death bells tolled thinly. They turned up Commerce Street through the main plaza, among rafts and wagons, and they crossed another plaza where boys were selling grapes and figs from little trundle carts. A few bony dogs slank off before them. They rode through the military plaza, and they passed the little street where the boy and the mule had drunk the night before. And there were clusters of women and girls at the well, and many shapes of wicker-covered clay jars standing about. They passed the little house where women inside were wailing, and the little hearse cart stood at the door with the horses patient and motionless in the heat and the flies. The captain kept quarters in a hotel on a plaza where there were trees and a small green gazebo with benches. An iron gate at the hotel front opened into a passageway with a courtyard at the rear. The walls were whitewashed and set with little ornate colored tiles. The captain's man wore carved boots with tall heels that rang smartly on the tiles and on the stairs ascending from the courtyard to the rooms above. In the courtyard there were green plants growing, and they were freshly watered and steaming. The captain's man strode down the long balcony and rapped sharply at the door at the end. A voice said for them to come in. He sat at a wickerwork desk, writing letters, the captain. They stood attending, the captain's man with his black hat in his hands. The captain wrote on, nor did he look up. Outside, the kid could hear a woman speaking in Spanish. Other than that, it was just the scratching of the captain's pen. When he had done, he laid down the pen and looked up. He looked at his man, and then he looked at the kid, and then he bent his head to read what he'd written. He nodded to himself and dusted the letter with sand from a little onyx box and folded it. Taking a match from a box of them on the desk, he lit it and held it to a stick of sealing wax until a small red medallion had pooled onto the paper. He shook out the match, blew briefly at the paper, and knuckled the seal with his ring. Then he stood the letter between two books on his desk and leaned back in his chair and looked at the kid again. He nodded gravely. Take seats, he said. They eased themselves into a kind of settle made from some dark wood. The captain's man had a large revolver at his belt. As they sat, he hitched the belt around so that the piece lay cradled between his thighs. He put his hat over it and leaned back. The kid folded his busted boots one behind the other and sat upright. The captain pushed his chair back and rose and came around to the front of the desk. He stood there for a measured minute, and then he hitched himself up on the desk and sat with his boots dangling. He had gray in his hair and in the sweeping mustaches that he wore, but he wasn't old.
Throw it up.
So you're the man, he said. What man? Said the kid. What man, sir? Said the captain.
Yeah.
How old are you, son? 19.
Ah!
The captain nodded his head. He was looking the kid over. What happened to you? What? Say, sir, said the recruiter.
When I'll get there.
Sir? I said, what happened to you? The kid looked at the man sitting next to him. He looked down at himself, and he looked at the captain again. I was fell on by robbers, he said. Robbers, said the captain. Took everything I had. Took my watch and everything.
Yeah.
Have you got a rifle? Not no more, I ain't. Where was it you were robbed? I don't know. There wasn't no name to it. It was just a wilderness. Where were you coming from? I was coming from Necky. Nacogdoches? Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
How many were there?
You all right, girl?
The kid stared at him. Robbers. How many robbers? 7 or 8, I reckon. I got busted on the head with a skin.
You done good, girl.
The captain squinted one eye.
Yeah. That's not
Were
good.
they Mexicans? Some. Mexicans and niggers. There was a white or two. They had a bunch of cattle they'd stolen. Only thing they left me with was an old piece of knife I had in my boot.
Yeah, there's
The
your
captain nodded. He folded his hands between his knees. What do you think of the chief? He said. The kid looked at the man in the settle next to him. He had his eyes shut. He looked down at his thumbs. I don't know nothing about it, he said. I'm afraid that's the case with a lot of Americans, said the captain. Where are you from, son? Tennessee.
easy now.
You worked with the volunteers at Monterey, were you? No, sir. Bravest bunch of men under fire I believe I ever saw. I suppose more men from Tennessee bled and died on the field in northern Mexico than from any other state. Did you know that? No, sir. They were sold out. Fought and died down there in that desert. And then they were sold out by their own country.
Who else said that
The
before?
kid sat silent. The captain leaned forward. We fought for it. Lost friends and brothers down there. And then, by God, if we didn't give it back. Back to a bunch of barbarians that even the most biased in their favor will admit have no least notion in God's earth of honor or justice or the meaning of Republican government. A people so cowardly they paid tribute 100 years to tribes of naked savages. Given up their crops and livestock, mines shut down, whole villages abandoned. While a heathen horde rides over the land, looting and killing with total impunity. Not a hand raised against them. What kind of people are these? The Apaches won't even shoot them. Did you know that? They kill them with rocks. The captain shook his head. He seemed made sad by what he had to tell. Did you know that when Colonel Doniphan took Chihuahua City, he inflicted over 1,000 casualties on the enemy and lost only 1 man, and him all but a suicide? With an army of unpaid irregulars that called him Bill, were half naked, and had walked to the battlefield from Missouri? No, sir. The captain leaned back and folded his arms. What we are dealing with, he said, is a race of degenerates. A mongrel race, little better than niggers, and maybe no better. There is no government in Mexico. Hell, there's no God in Mexico. Never will be. We are dealing with a people manifestly incapable of governing themselves. And you know what happens with people who cannot govern themselves? That's right. Others come in to govern for them. There are already some 14,000 French colonists in the state of Sonora. They're being given free land to settle. They're being given tools and livestock. Enlightened Mexicans encourage this. Paredes is already calling for secession from the Mexican government. They'd rather be ruled by toad-eaters than thieves and imbeciles. Colonel Carrasco is asking for American intervention, and he's going to get it. Right now, they're forming in Washington a commission to come out here and draw up the boundary lines between our country and Mexico. I don't think there's any question that ultimately Sonora will become a United States territory. Guayama's a U.S. port. Americans will be able to get to California without having to pass through our benighted sister republic. And our citizens will be protected at last from the notorious packs of cutthroats presently infesting the routes which they are obliged to travel. The captain was watching the kid. The kid looked uneasy. Son, said the captain, we are to be the instruments of liberation in a dark and troubled world. That's right. We are to spearhead the drive. We have the tacit support of Governor Burnett of California. He leaned forward and placed his hands on his knees. And we will be the ones who will divide the spoils. There will be a section of land for every man in my company. Fine grassland. Some of the finest in the world. A land rich in minerals, in gold and silver, I would say, beyond the wildest speculation. You're young, but I don't misread you. I'm seldom mistaken in a man. I think you mean to make your mark in this world. Am I wrong? No, sir. No. And I don't think you're the sort of chap to abandon a land that Americans fought and died for to a foreign power. And mark my word, unless Americans act, people like you and me who take their country seriously, while those mollycoddles in Washington sit on their hindsides, unless we act, Mexico, and I mean the whole of the country, will one day fly a European flag. Monroe Doctrine or no. The captain's voice had become soft and intense. He tilted his head to one side and regarded the kid with a sort of benevolence. The kid rubbed the palms of his hands on the knees of his filthy jeans. He glanced at the man beside him, but he seemed to be asleep. What about a saddle? He said. Saddle? Yes, sir. You don't have a saddle? No, sir. I thought you had a horse. A mule. I see. I got an old hull on the mule, but ain't much left of it. Ain't a whole lot left of the mule. He said I was to get a horse and a rifle. Sergeant Tremble did? I never promised him no saddle, said the sergeant. We'll get you a saddle. I did tell him we might find him some clothes, Captain. Right. We may be irregulars, but we don't want to look like bobtails, do we? No, sir. We ain't got no more broke horses, neither, said the sergeant. Well, break one. That old boy that was so good about breaking them is out of commission. I know that. Get somebody else. Yes, sir. Maybe this man can break horses. You ever break horses? No, sir. Ain't no need to sir me. Yes, sir. Sergeant, said the captain, easing himself down from the desk. Yes, sir. Sign this man up. The camp was upriver at the edge of the town. A tent patched up from old wagon canvas, a few wickiups made of brush, and beyond them a corral, in the form of a figure 8, likewise made from brush, where a few small painted ponies stood sulking in the sun.
Idiot.
"Corporal," called the sergeant.
He ain't here.
He dismounted and strode toward the tent and threw back the fly. The kid sat on a mule. 3 men were lying in the shade of a tree, and they studied him. "Howdy," said one.
Howdy.
"You new man?"
I reckon.
"Captain say when we're leaving this pest hole?"
He never said.
The sergeant came from the tent. "Where's he at?" he said.
Gone to town.
"Gone to town," said the sergeant. "Come here." The man rose from the ground and ambled over to the tent and stood with his hands resting in the small of his back. "This here man ain't got no outfit," said the sergeant. The man nodded. "The captain gave him a shirt and some money to get his boots mended. We need to get him something he can ride, and we need to get him a saddle."
A saddle?
"Ought to be able to sell that mule for enough to get him one of some kind." The man looked at the mule and turned back and squinted at the sergeant. He leaned and spat.
That there mule won't bring $10. What it brings, it brings. They done killed another beef.
"I don't want to hear about it."
I can't do nothing with them.
"I ain't telling the captain. He'll roll them eyes around till they come unscrewed and fall out in the ground." The man spat again.
Well, that's the God's truth anyway.
"See to this man now. I got to get.
Well,
Ain't nobody sick, is they?"
no.
"Thank God for that." He stood up into the saddle and touched the horse's neck lightly with the reins. He looked back and shook his head. In the evening, the kid and 2 other recruits went into town. He bathed and shaved himself, and he wore a pair of blue cord trousers and the cotton shirt the captain had given him, and save for the boots, he looked a new man altogether. His friends rode small and colorful horses that 40 days ago had been wild animals on the plain, and they shied and skittered and snapped like turtles.
Wait till you get you one of these,
said the second corporal. "You ain't never had no fun."
These horses is all right,
said the other.
There's 1 or 2 in there yet that might make you a horse.
The kid looked down at them from his mule. They rode either side like escorts, and the mule trotted with its head up, its eyes shifting nervously.
They'll all stick your head in the ground,
said the second corporal. They rode through a plaza thronged with wagons and stock, with immigrants and Texans and Mexicans, and with slaves and Lipan Indians, and deputations of Caruncuas, tall and austere, their faces dyed blue, and their hands locked about the shafts of their 6-foot spears, all but naked savages who, with their painted skins and their whispered taste for human flesh, seemed outrageous presences, even in that fabled company. The recruits rode with their animals close rein, and they turned up past the courthouse and along the high walls of the castle with the broken glass embedded in the topmost course. In the main plaza, a band had assembled and were tuning their instruments. The riders turned down Salina Street past small gaming houses and coffee stands, and there were in this street a number of Mexican harness makers and traders and keepers of game chickens and cobblers and bootmakers in little stalls or shops of mud. The second corporal was from Texas and spoke a little Spanish, and he meant to trade the mule. The other boy was from Missouri. They were in good spirits, scrubbed and combed, clean shirts all, each foreseeing a night of drink, perhaps of love. How many youths have come home cold and dead from just such nights and just such plans? They traded the mule, accoutered as it was, for a Texas stock saddle, bare tree with rawhide cover, not new but sound. For a bridle and bit that was new. For a woven wool blanket from Saltillo that was dusty, new or not. lastly for a $2.50 gold piece. The Texan looked at this small coin in the kid's palm and demanded more money, but the harness maker shook his head and held up his hands in utter finality. "What about my boots?" said the kid. "Isus botas," said the Texan. "Botas? See." He made sewing motions. The harness maker looked down at the boots. He cupped his fingers in a little gesture of impatience, and the kid took off the boots and stood barefoot in the dust. When all was done, they stood in the street and looked at one another. The kid had his new tack slung up on his shoulder. The second corporal looked at the boy from Missouri. "You got any money, Earl?" "Not a copper cent." "Well, I ain't either. We might as well get our asses back on out of that hole of misery." The kid shifted the weight of the gear on his shoulder. "We got this quarter eagle to drink up yet," he said. Already it is twilight down in the Laredito. Bats fly forth from their roostings in courthouse and tower and circle the quarter. The air is full of the smell of burning charcoal. Children and dogs squat by the mud stoops, and gamecocks flap and settle in the branches of the fruit trees. They go afoot, these comrades, down along a bare adobe wall. Band music carries dimly from the square. They pass a water cart in the street, and they pass a hole in the wall where by the light of a small forge fire an old man beats out shapes of metal. They pass in a doorway a young girl whose beauty becomes like flowers. They arrive at last before a wooden door. It's hinged into a larger door or gate, and all must step over the foot-high sill where 1,000 boots have scuffed away the wood, where fools in their hundreds have tripped or fallen or tottered drunkenly into the street. They pass along a ramada in a courtyard by an old grape arbor, where small fowl nod in the dusk among the gnarled and barren vines. And they enter a cantina where the lamps are lit. And they cross stooping under a low beam to a bar and belly up, 1, 2, 3. There is an old disordered Mennonite in this place, and he turns to study them. A thin man in a leather waistcoat, a black and straight-brimmed hat set square on his head, a thin ring of whiskers. The recruits order glasses of whiskey and drink them down, and order more. There are Monte games at tables by the wall, and there are whorers at another table who look the recruits over. The recruits stand sideways along the bar with their thumbs in their belts and watch the room. They talk among themselves of the expedition in loud voices, and the old Mennonite shakes a rueful head and sips his drink and mutters. "They'll stop you at the river," he says. The second corporal looks past his comrades. "Are you talking to me?" "At the river, be told. They'll change you into a man." "Who will?" "The United States Army, General Worth." "The hell they will. Pray that they will." He looks at his comrades. He leans toward the Mennonite. "What does that mean, old man?" "Do ye cross that river with yon filibuster armed, you'll not cross it back." "Don't aim to cross it back. We going to Sonora." "What's it to you, old man?" The Mennonite watches the enshadowed dark before them as it is reflected to him in the mirror of the bar. He turns to them. His eyes are wet. He speaks slowly. "The wrath of God lies sleeping. It was here 1,000,000 years before men were, and only men have power to wake it. Hell ain't half full. Hear me. Ye carry war of a madman's making into a foreign land. You'll wake more than the dogs." But they berated the old man and swore at him until he moved off down the bar, muttering. And how else could it be? How these things end? in confusion and curses and blood. They drank on, and the wind blew in the streets, and the stars that had been overhead lay low in the west. And these young men fell afoul of others, and words were said that could not be put right again. And in the dawn, the kid and the second corporal knelt over the boy from Missouri who had been named Earl, and they spoke his name, but he never spoke back. He lay on his side in the dust of the courtyard. The men were gone. The whores were gone. An old man swept the clay floor within the cantina. The boy lay with his skull broken in a pool of blood, none knew by whom. A third one came to be with them in the courtyard. It was the Mennonite. A warm wind was blowing, and the east held a gray light. The fowls, roosting among the grapevines, had begun to stir and call. There is no such joy in the tavern as upon the road thereto, said the Mennonite. He had been holding his hat in his hands, and now he set it upon his head again, and turned, and went out the gate. Chapter 4.
Oh, here we go.
Setting forth with the filibusters, on alien ground, shooting antelope, pursued by cholera, wolves, wagon repairs, a desert waste, night storms, the ghost manada, a prayer for rain, a desert homestead, the old man, new country, an abandoned village, herdsmen on the plain, attacked by Comanches.
Attacked by Comanches. Oh, no.
5 days later, on the dead man's horse, he followed the riders and wagons through the plaza and out of the town on the road down country. They rode through Castroville, where coyotes had dug up the dead and scattered their bones. And they crossed the Frio River, and they crossed the Nueces, and they left the Presidio road and turned north with scouts posted ahead and to the rear. They crossed the Del Norte by night and waded up out of the shallow sandy ford into a howling wilderness. Dawn saw them deployed in a long file over the plain, the dry wood wagons already moaning, horses snuffling. A dull thump of hooves and clank of gear and the constant light chink of harness. Save for scattered clumps of buckrush and prickly pear and little patches of twisted grass, the ground was bare. And there were low mountains to the south, and they were bare, too. Westward, the horizon lay flat and true as a spirit level. Those first days, they saw no game, no birds save buzzards. They saw in the distance herds of sheep or goats moving along the skyline in scarves of dust, and they ate the meat of wild asses. The sergeant carried in his saddle scabbard a heavy Wesson rifle that used a false muzzle and paper match and fired a cone shaker. With it, he killed the little wild pigs of the desert. And later, when they began to see herds of antelope, he would halt in the dusk with the sun off the land and screwing a bipod into the threaded boss on the underside of the barrel, would kill these animals where they stood grazing at distances of half a mile. The rifle carried a vernier sight on the tank, and he would eye the distance and gauge the wind and set the sight like a man using a micrometer. The second corporal would lie at his elbow with a glass and call the shots high or low should he miss. The wagon would wait by until he had shot a stand of 3 or 4, and then rumble off across the cooling land with the skinners jostling and grinning in the bed. The sergeant never put the rifle up, but when he wiped and greased the bore. They rode well armed, each man with a rifle, and many with a small bore 5-shot Colt's revolvers. The captain carried a pair of dragoon pistols in scabbards that mounted across the pommel of his saddle, so that they rode at each knee. These guns were United States Colt's patent, and he had bought them from a deserter in a Soledad livery stable and paid $80 in gold for them and the scabbards, and the mold, and flask they came with. The rifle the kid carried had been sawed down and rebored till it weighed very light indeed. And the mold for it was so small he had to patch the balls with buckskin. He had fired it a few times, and it carried much where it chose. It rode before him on a saddle bow, he having no scabbard. It had been carried so before, God's years of it, and the forestock was much worn beneath. In the early dark, the wagon came back with the meat. The Skinners had piled the wagon bed with mesquite brush and stumps they'd drug out of the ground with the horses, and they unloaded the firewood and commenced cutting up the gutted antelopes in the floor of the wagon with bowie knives and hand axes, laughing and hacking in a welter of gore, a reeking scene in the light of the handheld weapons. By full dark, the blackened rib racks leaned steaming at the fires, and there was a jousting over the coals with shaven sticks whereon were skewered gobs of meat and a clank of canteens and endless raillery. And sleep that night on the cold plains of the fallen land, 46 men wrapped in their blankets under the selfsame stars. The prairie wolves so like in their yammering, yet all about so changed and strange. They caught up and set out each day in the dark before the day yet was. And they ate cold meat and brisket and made no fire. The sun rose on a column already ragged these 6 days out. Among their clothes there was small agreement, and among their hats less. The little painted horses stepped, shifty and truculent, and a vicious snarl of flies fought constantly in the bed of the game wagon. The dust the party raised was quickly dispersed and lost in the immensity of that landscape. And there was no dust other, for the pale sutler who pursued them drives unseen, and his lean horse and his lean cart leave no track upon such ground, or any ground.
We will not sit idly
By 1,000 fires in the iron blue dusk he keeps his commissary, and he's a wry and grinning tradesman, good to follow every campaign, or hound men from their holes in just those whited regions where they've gone to hide from God.
Take the law into their own hands.
On this day, 2 men fell sick,
Today,
and
believe
1
me,
died before
you
God.
will see it.
In the morning, there was another ill to take his place. The 2 of them were laid among sacks of beans and rice and coffee in a supply wagon with blankets to keep them from the sun. And they rode with the slamming and jarring of the wagon half shearing the meat from the bones, so that they could The men turned out in the early morning lines to dig their graves with the blade bones of antelope, and they covered them with stones and rode on again. They rode on, and the sun in the east flushed pale streaks of light, and then a deeper run of color, like blood seeping up in sudden reaches, flaring flame-wise. And where the earth drained up into the sky at the edge of creation, the top of the sun rose out of nothing, like the head of a great red phallus, until it cleared the unseen rim and sat squat and pulsing and malevolent behind them. The shadows of the smallest stones lay like pencil lines across the sand, and the shapes of the men and their mounts advanced elongate before them like strands of the night from which they had ridden, like tentacles to bind them to the darkness yet to come. They rode with their heads down, faceless under their hats, like an army asleep on the march. By mid-morning, another man had died, and they lifted him from the wagon where he'd stained the sacks he'd laid among, and buried him also, and rode on. Now wolves had come to follow them, great pale lobos with yellow eyes that trotted neat-footed, or squatted in the shimmering heat to watch them where they made their noon halt. Moving on again, loping, sidling, ambling with their long noses to the ground. In the evening, their eyes shifted and winked out there on the edge of the firelight. And in the morning, when the riders rode out in the cool dark, they could hear the snarling and the pop of their mouths behind them as they sacked the camp for meat scraps.
Try it again.
The wagons drew so dry They slouched from side to side like dogs, and the sand was grinding them away. The wheels shrank, and the spokes reeled in their hubs and clattered like loom shafts. And at night they'd drive false spokes into the mortises and tie them down with strips of green hide. And they'd drive wedges between the iron of the tires and the sun-cracked furrows. They wobbled on. The trace of their untrue labors like seismic tracks in the sand. The dual-edged pegs worked loose and dropped behind. Began to break up. 10 days out, with 4 men dead, they started across a plain of pure pumice, where there grew no shrub, no weed, as far as the eye could see. The captain called a halt, and he called up the Mexican who served as guide. They talked, and the Mexican gestured, and the captain gestured, and after a while, they moved on again. "This looks like the highway to hell to me," said a man from the ranks. "What does he reckon for the horses to eat?" "I believe they're just supposed to grit up on the sand like chickens and be ready for the shelled corn when it does come." In 2 days, they began to come upon bones and cast off apparel. They saw half-buried skeletons of mules with the bones so white and polished they seemed incandescent even in that blazing heat.
Have a look around.
And they saw panniers and pack saddles
And
in
no
the
other
palms of the
outfit
hand.
beats their prices.
And they saw a mule entire, the dried and blackened carcass hard as iron. They rode on. The white noon saw them through the waste like a ghost army, so pale they were with dust, like shades of figures erased upon a board. The wolves loped paler yet, and grouped and skittered and lifted their lean snouts on the air. At night, the horses were fed by hand from sacks of meal and watered from buckets. There was no more sickness.
That's done.
The survivors lay quietly in that cratered void and watched the white-hot stars go rifling down in the dark, or slept with their alien hearts beating in the sand like pilgrims exhausted upon the face of the planet Anareta,
Appreciate it.
clutched to a namelessness wheeling in the night. They moved on, and the iron of the wagon tires grew polished bright as chrome in the pumice. To the south, the blue Cordilleras stood footed in their paler image on the sand like reflections in a lake, and there were no wolves now. They took to riding by night, silent jornadas, save for the trundling of the wagons and the wheeze of the animals. Under the moonlight, a strange party of elders, with the white dust thick on their mustaches and their eyebrows. They moved on, and the stars jostled and arced across the firmament and died beyond the ink-black mountains. They came to know the night sky as well. Western eyes that read more geometric constructions than those names given by the ancients. Tethered to the pole star, they rode the Dipper round, while Orion rose in the southwest like a great electric kite. The sand lay blue in the moonlight, and the iron tires of the wagons rolled among the shapes of the riders in gleaming hoops that veered and wheeled.
That's mighty popular these days.
Vaguely navigational, like slender astrolabes. And the polished shoes of the horses kept hasping up like a myriad of eyes winking across the desert floor. They watched storms out there so distant they could not be heard. The silent lightning flaring sheetwise, and the thin black spine of the mountain chain
I'll let you look around some more.
and sucked away again in the dark. They saw wild horses racing on the plain, pounding their shadows down the night and leaving the moonlight a luminous dust like the palest stain of their passing. All night the wind blew, and the fine dust set their teeth on edge. Sand in everything, grit in all they ate. In the morning, a urine-colored sun rose blearily through panes of dust on a dim world and without feature. The animals were failing. They halted and made a dry camp without wood or water, and the wretched ponies huddled and whimpered like dogs. That night they rode through a region electric and wild, where strange shapes of soft blue fire ran over the metal of the horses' trappings, and the wagon wheels rolled in hoops of fire, and little shapes of pale blue light came to perch in the ears of the horses and in the beards of the men. All night sheet lightning quaked sourceless to the west, beyond the midnight thunderheads, making a bluish day of the distant desert. The mountains on the southern skyline stark and black and livid, like a land of some other order out there whose true geology was not stone but fear. The thunder moved up from the southwest, and lightning lit the desert all about them, blue and barren. Great clanging reaches ordered out of the absolute night like some demon kingdom summoned up, or changeling land that come the day would leave them neither trace nor smoke nor ruin more than any troubling dream. They halted in the dark to recruit the animals, and some of the men stowed their arms in the wagons for fear of drawing the lightning, and a man named Hayward prayed for rain. He prayed, "Almighty God, if it ain't too far out of the way of things in your eternal plan, do you reckon we could have a little rain down here?" "Pray it out," some called. And kneeling, he cried out among the thunder and the wind, "Lord, we are dried to jerky down here. Just a few drops for some old boys out here on the prairie and a long ways from home." "Amen," they said. And catching up their mounts, they rode on. Within the hour, the wind cooled, and drops of rain the size of grapeshot fell upon them out of that wild darkness. The smell of wet stone, and the sweet smell of the wet horses and wet leather. They rode on. They rode through the heat of the day,
This is gonna hurt.
and the horses perishing. And in the evening, these elect, shabby and white with dust, like a company of armed and mounted millers wandering in dementia, rode up off the desert through a gap in the low stone hills and down upon a solitary jacal, crude hut of mud and wattles and a rudimentary stable and corrals. Bone palings ruled the small and dusty purlieus here, and death seemed the most prevalent feature of the landscape. Strange fences that the sand and wind had scoured, and the sun bleached and cracked like old porcelain, with dry brown weather cracks, and where no life moved. The corrugated forms of the riders passed jingling across the dry Bisterland and across the mud facade of the jacal, the horses trembling, smelling water. The captain raised his hand, and the sergeant spoke, and two men dismounted and advanced upon the hut with rifles. They pushed open a door made of rawhide and entered. In a few minutes, they reappeared. "Somebody's here somewheres. This hot cold." The captain surveyed the distance with an air of vigilance. He dismounted with the patience of one used to dealing with incompetence and crossed to the jacal. When he came out, he surveyed the terrain again. The horses shifted and clinked and stamped, and the men pulled their jaws down and spoke roughly to them. "Sergeant?" "Yes, sir?" "These people can't be far. See if you can find them. And see if there's any forage here for the animals." "Forage?" "Forage." The sergeant placed a hand on the cantle and looked about at the place they were in and shook his head and dismounted. They went through the jacal and into the enclosure behind and out to the stable. There were no animals and nothing but a stall half filled with the dry sorghums in the way of feed. They walked out the back to a sink among the stones where water stood, and a thin stream flowed away over the sand. There were hoof prints about the tank and dry manure, and some small birds ran mindlessly along the rim of the little creek. The sergeant had been squatting on his heels, and now he rose and spat. "Well," he said, "is there any direction you can't see 20 miles in?" The recruits studied the emptiness about. "I don't believe the folks here has gone that long." They drank and walked back toward the jacal. Horses were being led along the narrow path. The captain was standing with his thumbs in his belt. "I can't see where they've got to," said the sergeant.
Ain't even worth it. You sure
"What's in the
are
shed?"
odd.
"Some old dry
Hey,
fodder."
mister.
The captain frowned. "They ought to have a goat or a hog, something. Chickens." In a few minutes, two men came dragging an old man from the stable. He was covered with dust and dry chaff, and he held one arm across his eyes. He was dragged, moaning, to the captain's feet, where he lay, prostrate, in what looked like windings of white cotton. He put his hands over his ears and his elbows before his eyes, like one called upon to witness some appalling thing. The captain turned away in disgust. The sergeant toed it with his boot.
Good girl.
"What's wrong with him?" he said. "He's pissing himself, Sergeant. He's pissing himself." The captain gestured at the man with his gloves. "Yes, sir." "Well, get him the hell
Out
out.
of the way!
Do you want Candelario to talk to
Good
him?"
girl.
"He's a halfwit. Get him away from me." They dragged the old man away. He had begun to babble, but no one listened. And in the morning, he was gone. They bivouacked by the tank, and the farrier saw to the mules and ponies that had thrown the shoes, and they worked on the wagons by firelight far into the night. They set forth in a crimson dawn where sky and earth closed in a razorless plain. Out there, dark little archipelagos of cloud, and the vast world of sand and scrub shearing upward into the shoreless void where those blue islands trembled, and the earth grew uncertain, gravely canted and veering out through tinctures of roads, and the dark beyond the dawn to the uttermost rebate of space. They rode through regions of party-colored snow, upthrust and ragged cliffs, and shelves of trap rock reared in faults, and anticlines curved back upon themselves and broken off like stumps of great stone tree boles, and stones the lightning had clove open, seeps exploding in steam in some old storm. They rode past trap dikes and brown rock, running down the narrow chines of the ridges and onto the plain like the ruins of old walls. Such auguries everywhere of the hand of man before man was, or any living thing. They passed through a village then and now in ruins, and they camped in the walls of a tall mud church and burned the fallen timbers of the roof for their fire, while owls cried from the arches in the dark. The following day, on the skyline to the south, they saw clouds of dust that lay across the earth for miles.
You ain't looking for gold here, is
They
you?
rode on,
'Cause,
watching the dust until it
called
began to near, and the captain raised his hand for a halt and took from his saddlebag his old brass cavalry telescope and uncoupled it and swept it slowly over the land.
All right.
The sergeant sat his horse beside him, and after a while the captain handed him the glass. "Hell of a herd of something. I believe it's horses. How far off do you make them?" "Hard to tell." "Call Candelario up here." The sergeant turned and motioned for the Mexican.
Too hard for me now.
When he rode up, he handed him the glass, and the Mexican raised it to his eye and squinted. Then he lowered the glass and watched with his naked eyes, and then he raised it and looked again. Then he sat his horse with the glass at his chest like a crucifix. "Well," said the captain. He shook his head. "What the hell does that mean? They're not buffalo, are they?" "No, I think maybe horses." "Let me have the glass." The Mexican handed him the telescope, and he glanced the horizon again, and collapsed the tube shut with the heel of his hand, and replaced it in his bag, and raised his hand, and went on. They were cattle, mules, horses. There were several thousand head, and they were moving quarter-wise toward the company. By late afternoon, riders were visible to the bare eye, a handful of ragged Indians mending the outer flanks of the herd with their nimble ponies. Others in hats, perhaps Mexicans. The sergeant dropped back to where the captain was riding. "What do you make of that, Captain?" I make it a parcel of heathen stock thieves, is what I make it. What do you? Looks like it to me. The captain watched through the glass. I suppose they've seen us, he said. They've seen us. How many riders do you make it? It doesn't mean it. The captain tapped the instrument in his gloved hand. They don't seem concerned, do they? No, sir, they don't. The captain smiled grimly. We may see a little sport here before the day is out. The first of the herd began to swing past them in a pall of yellow dust, rangy, slack-ribbed cattle with horns that grew a goggle, and no two alike, and small, thin mules, coal black, that shouldered one another and reared their mallet-shaped heads above the backs of the others, and then more cattle. And finally, the first of the herders riding up the outer side and keeping the stock between themselves and the mounted company. Behind them came a herd of several hundred ponies.
Come on.
The sergeant looked for Candelario. He kept backing along the ranks, but he couldn't find him. He nudged his horse through the column and moved up the far side. The lattermost of the drovers were now coming through the dust, and the captain was gesturing and shouting. The ponies had begun to veer off from the herd, and the drovers were beating their way toward this armed company met with on the plain. Already you could see through the dust on the ponies' hides the painted chevrons, and the hands and rising suns, and birds and fish of every device, like the shade of old work through sizing on a canvas. And now, too, you could hear above the pounding of the unshod hooves the piping of the quena, flutes made from human bones. And some among the company had begun to saw back on their mounts, and some to mill in confusion. When up from the offside of those ponies there rose a feeble horde of mounted lancers and archers, bearing shields bedight with bits of broken mirror glass that cast 1,000 unpieced suns against the eyes of their enemies. A legion of horribles, hundreds in number, half naked or clad in costumes antic or biblical, or wardrobed out of a fevered dream, with the skins of animals and silk finery, and pieces of uniforms still tracked with the blood of prior owners, coats of slain dragoons, frogged and braided cavalry jackets, one in a stovepipe hat, and one with an umbrella, and one in white stockings and a blood-stained wedding veil, and some in headgear of crane feathers, rawhide belts that bore the horns of bull or buck, and one in a pigeon-tailed coat worn backwards and otherwise naked, and one in the armor of a Spanish conquistador, with breastplate and pauldrons deeply dented with old blows of beasts or silver gun, and whose very bones were missed, and with their braids spliced up with the hair of other beasts until they trailed on the ground, and their horses' ears and tails bound with bits of brightly colored cloth, and one whose horse's whole head was almost red, and all the horses' faces gaudy and grotesque like mounted hounds, death hilarious, all howling in a barbarous tongue, and riding down upon them like a horde from a hell more horrible yet than the brimstone land of Christian reckoning, screeching and yammering and curling and smoke like those vapors from the regions beyond right knowing. Oh my God, said the sergeant. A rattling drove was past the air, and met the top and dropped in the bounce. Horses were rearing and marching. The Mongol hordes swung up along their flanks and rode full upon them with lances. The cavalry was now coming. The first shots were fired, and the gray rifle smoke rolled through the dust as the lancers reached their legs. The kid's horse sank with a long pneumatic sigh. He had already fired his rifle, and now he sat on the ground and fumbled with his shot pouch. A man near him sat with an arrow hanging out of his neck. He was bent slightly, as if in prayer. The kid would have reached for the bloody hoop under the point, but then he saw that the man wore another arrow in his breast to the flesh, and he was dead. Everywhere there were horses down and men scrambling. And he saw a man who sat charging his rifle while blood rained from his ears. And he saw a man with their revolvers disassembled, trying to fit the spare loaded cylinders they carried. And he saw men kneeling who tilted and clasped their shadows on the ground. And he saw men lanced and caught up by the hair and scalped standing. And he saw the horses of war trampled down the fallen. And a little white-faced pony with one clouded eye leaned out of the murk and snapped at it like a dog and was gone. Among the wounded, some seemed dumb without understanding, and some were pale through the masks of dust, and some had fouled themselves or tottered broken onto the spears. Now driving in a wild freeze of headlong horses, with eyes walled and teeth cropped, and naked riders with clusters of arrows clenched in their jaws, and their shields winking in the dust. And up the far side of the ruined ranks, and up the bone flutes, and dropping down off the sides of their mouths, with one heel hung on the withered shoulder, and their short hooves flexing beneath the outstretched necks of the ponies, until they had circled around their ranks in two. And then rising up like fire stars, some with nightmare faces painted on their breasts, riding down the unhorsed Saxons and spearing them, and leaping from their mounts with knives, running about the ground with a peculiar manipulated trot, like creatures driven to alien forms of locomotion, and stripping the corpse from their dead, and seizing them up by the hair, and passing their blades about the skulls of the living and the dead alike, and snatching off their bloody wigs, and chopping at their naked bodies, ripping off limbs and heads, gutting the strange white torsos, and holding up great handfuls of viscera, genitals. Some of the savages so slathered up with gore they might have rolled in it like dogs. And some who fell upon the dying sodomized them with loud cries to their fellows. And now the horses of the dead came pounding out of the smoke and dust, encircled with flapping leather and wild manes and eyes whitened with fear, like the eyes of the blind. And some were feathered with arrows, and some lanced through and stumbling and vomiting blood as they wheeled across the killing ground and clattered from sight again. Dust stenched the wet and naked heads of the scalped, who with the fringe of hair below their wounds and tonsured to the bone, now lay like maimed and naked monks in the blood-slaked dust. And everywhere the dying groaned and gibbered, and horses lay screaming.
We have to stop.
Chapter 5.
Echo stop.